What's a historical fact that would shock most people to find out? The ancient Greeks, inventors of democracy, would elect their officials to one-year terms. Each official's finances were audited at the beginning and end of their term. If anything was amiss, they would be tried and executed. Picasso, Bruce Lee and J.R.R. Tolkien all died the same year. The Second Congo War, also known as Africa's World War, was the deadliest conflict since World War II with over 5 million people killed. Most people have never heard of it despite it ending in 2003. Siaka Stevens was technically both the shortest and longest serving leader of Sierra Leone. He was an opposition leader that won an extremely close election, and the ruling party that had been ruling the country since independence didn't want to lose their power, so they planned to arrest him just before he could take the oath of office. But things didn't go exactly to plan and he ended up being removed from office a little while after taking the oath of office, meaning he was technically president for a little less than an hour before being removed from office. However, there was a counter-coup a few months later, and Siaka Stevens was brought back into power. During his time in office, Stevens became increasingly authoritarian and eventually established a one-party state, ruling the country for 17 years. The year 536 was deemed the worst year to be alive. Volcanic eruptions caused prolonged dark sky for up to 18 months. This then caused a mini ice age, crop failures and plague over the next 10 years, killing millions. Sharks are older than the rings on Saturn. The Great Papago Escape. The Allies had prisoner of war camps for German soldiers. One of those camps was in Arizona. On the night of December 23, 1944, 25 Germans tunneled out of Camp Papago Park, near Phoenix, Arizona, and fled into the surrounding desert. The German plan was to escape by rafts on a nearby river. They dragged their rafts with them, and escaped into the desert only to find the map was showing waterways that only existed during the monsoons. They had to walk back to the camp to avoid dying in the desert. Today Papago Park is a popular tourist attraction, but there is no sign of the camp or tunnels. Woodrow Wilson was mentally and emotionally incapacitated by a massive stroke in October 1919, and his wife and doctors essentially ran the country until Harding took office in 1921. Some historians refer to Edith Wilson as the first female president. Sharpshooter Annie Oakley had a stage act where she would shoot a cigarette out of someone's mouth. While she was touring Europe, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany surprised everyone on a whim and insisted on holding the cigarette. Ever the professional, Oakley shot the cigarette without harming the Kaiser. Several years later World War I is underway, and the US goes to war against Germany. Oakley wrote a letter to Kaiser Wilhelm asking if she could have another try at that shot. He didn't reply. We are closer to the time of the T-Rex than the T-Rex is to the time of the Stegosaurus. It took about 4 times longer to get from copper swords to steel swords than it took from steel swords to atomic bombs. Hitler, Stalin, Tito, Freud and Trotsky were all in Vienna in 1913. The US secretly injected people, typically poor minorities, including children and pregnant women, with plutonium and other radioactive materials, and then studied them for decades. When they finally admitted it, the report was released at the same time of the O.J. verdict to bury the story. We put man on the moon before wheels on suitcases. People used to get their feet x-rayed at the shoe store to check their shoe fit. Approximately 8% of Canadians were enlisted in the Canadian Expeditionary Force during World War I. That isn't 8% of eligible Canadians, or 8% of Canadian men, that's 8% of the entire population of Canada. If a similar proportion enlisted in the United States today, there would be 26 million people serving in the U.S. Armed Forces. When the SS Britannia went down in the South Atlantic, a raft of survivors managed to get away. According to the men on the raft, there was one more survivor on the raft with them. But he was unfortunately pulled under by a giant squid which then returned and attacked their lieutenant named Cox, who they managed to save before scaring the beast away. Their claims were called out as preposterous and made up when they returned home until Lieutenant Cox got sick of being accused of such and went to see a local marine biologist at a college. The biologist validated Cox's claims as he had scars 1 to 1.25 inches in size, which definitely belonged to a 23 feet long squid. It is believed that this story is the only known substantiated report of death by giant squid. In 2006, the Earth was hit by a gamma-ray burst from a distant supernova that stripped away about 6% of our top atmosphere. It's fine now. If it had been bigger, it would have wiped everything on Earth out, and by bigger I mean if it was 20 to 25%. Many people know about the suffragettes who won the vote for some UK women in 1918. But many people don't know that prior to 1918, men did not have universal suffrage. 1918 is also the date which non-land-owning men got the right to vote. Prior to that, the vote had been only for wealthy land-owning lords, which was just 5% of the population. Over a period of the preceding 80 years, concessions were slowly made to allow more men, and then some women, to vote.